Goal setting through service learning. So I've been teaching first year seminars since the fall of 2012. I got out of my master's program, went straight into advising and then part-time teaching. I'm John Starkey. I've been teaching since fall of 2012. I've also been working as an advisor since then. The reason I bring this up is because in the fall of 2012, I was thrown into teaching with no rhyme or reason, no help behind the scenes getting me ready to teach. I was literally said, here, given this class. So ultimately, when I started teaching the first year seminar, our first year seminar coordinator said, hey, we need to incorporate service learning into the first year seminar. I immediately stereotyped service learning as fundraising and/or, what's the other word I was going to use? Volunteer work. I didn't think beyond fundraising or volunteer work because initially, as a first-time teacher, you're worried about everything else. So when I first heard service learning, that's all I thought about. So immediately, I was like, okay, so we want students to volunteer or fundraise, correct? All right, sounds good. So I immediately picked a foundation that I have a close personal relationship with, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and I was like, we're going to volunteer and fundraise for this foundation. Now, I said, hey students, I want to raise a bunch of money for this foundation. I did not say a specific amount. I did not give a specific amount of volunteer hours. I said, hey, let's just raise a bunch of money for this foundation. Now, that was a huge mistake. Does anybody know why that was a mistake? Because with no expectations and that free range and no real goals, typically students don't meet whatever your expectations are because they don't exist, correct? Also, it was poor use of the YOLOs at the time because I wasn't fully grasping how to incorporate the YOLOs into the classroom experience. So I immediately went from annoying them or demotivating my students about fundraising and volunteer work and what I thought was service learning to immediately going into something I like to call goal setting, right? Now it's obvious if you set goals, you're more likely to reach those goals. So what I wanted to do with my students was instead of, hey, let's raise a bunch of money, hey, let's each raise individually $150 in the next 3 months. And then beyond that, I went, let's try to raise $50 the first month, $50 the second month, $50 the third month, et cetera, et cetera. Now, since I teach a business class, we set it up as a mock business, AKA different departments, marketing, finance, accounting, and I incorporated assignments relevant to those. But I pretended that a nonprofit hired my class to help them fundraise. And I got my students in the mindset that we were hired to help this nonprofit fundraise. We're not a class, this is what we were hired to do. So I immediately started talking from that perspective, and I tried to get them to understand this project as something more important than it actually was. Hence why I wanted them to stick with that perspective. Now beyond this, with the goal setting of the $50, the $100, et cetera, ultimately what I was trying to do there was I was trying to give them sales goals or quotas, except they weren't selling a service or product, they were selling information about how the donator's money can potentially help this cause or this foundation. So, jumping a little bit forward, I thought 150 was realistic for each student in the class, 20 to 24 students, if they actually tried to fundraise for 3 months. So I wanted to focus on, how much time do I got, 2 minutes? I wanted them to focus on actually trying to fundraise and not paying out of their pocket the $150. Now obviously $150 can be a lot for some students, so I constantly was telling them, 1, you're not going to be graded on how much money you raise. 2, I don't want you to donate your own money even if you haven't. These are points I would typically reiterate throughout the entire semester. And in a way to hold them accountable, I would assign leads for each of the projects to say, hey, are you trying to raise your money? How are you raising your money? So on and so forth, to make the students feel accountable. In addition to that, I would individually meet with the students throughout the semester for small increments of time, saying, hey, have you reached your goal? Have you reached your goal? How are you going to reach your goal? Et cetera, et cetera. Now beyond this, I started to see that they were reaching their goals. And I was like, oh, I need to stop calling this an assignment. I immediately threw out the word assignment, and I never use it anymore for any of my classes. I use goals. This is our next goal, this is our next goal, this is our next goal, this is our goal for this project, et cetera, et cetera. And I started noticing that with giving them these goals and motivating them to reach goals, aka complete assignments, whether it's fundraising or one of the subsequential assignments, I immediately started realizing that they were reaching their goals if they had goals. And if I was personally showing an interest in them reaching their goals. Then this branched out from raising money to completing volunteer hours, so on and so forth, in addition to all the educational aspects of the assignment, creating a business plan. It got to the point where I would also have my students create recommendations for whatever foundation they were working on behalf of. Now fast forward, turning assignment into goal. Ultimately, since fall of 2012, I've taught over 300 students, and those 300 students have raised over $40,000 for the foundation we've been working on behalf of, without my resources or without me donating any money, because I gave them a goal.
All right.
Very cool.
Okay, 2 minutes for questions.
And one quick thing, if you get assignment out of it, if you stop saying assignment, I've noticed in changing the word assignment with goal, typically it ends much better. Questions? Yes, sir.
You have to say approximately how much in-class time, just like from the actual in-class meeting, time is devoted to this. What would you say?
A lot. I'd say half. Honestly, I focus half on service learning, and I know I was harping a bunch on the fundraising aspect, but beyond that, there's tons of other elements regarding when I separate them in the departments, doing assignments relative to what department they're for, meeting with their bosses, meeting with me. I honestly say it probably takes half the class just for that. But if you look at the ULOs and you see what we're doing through service learning, you're seeing that we're touching on almost every ULO just by incorporating service learning, even in the smallest bit to your class. So I'm easily touching on all the ULOs without going through monotonous book stuff. So I'm touching all the ULOs through this project, and I've obviously gotten much better at it compared to fall of 2012. Other questions? 6 minutes is intense.
So you went through the service learning department, or?
No, I did not. You have to go through them if you are doing volunteer work, so you can sign the forms to make sure the liability forms. So through volunteer work, we would always go through them. But for actual fundraising, well, it was just my students raising money, whether if it was for a specific cause, they would create a web page. All the money would get uploaded to that in some form or fashion, however they were raising it, so on and so forth.
So no liability issues there then?
No, not if you trust your students, which you kind of have to. It's a stretch.
I think as long as they are not interacting directly with
Yeah, there's an
with community members, providing a service or instruction of some kind. I don't think the university has requirements.
So what kind of
around
fundraising
liability.
did they do then?
fundraising around UNLV. We had them each do like a resource tree, trying to figure out where their family and friends worked, so on and so forth. But I know I'm out of time. But yeah,
Okay, all right.
yeah. You could ask me at the end again. But really, it was just about yelling at them, "Hey, reach your goal," and it worked.